In our last video, we talked about different ways that we can unwrap an object so that we can apply a texture to it. We talked about a UVW map and an unwrap UVW. So let's continue from there, and we talked about how we can do basic shapes. Let's try to talk about a more complex shape. Now, a UVW map isn't really going to work for us too well because we have all of these different complex shapes. So what we're going to want to do is an unwrap UVW. So in the modify list, because I want to modify it, I'm going to go ahead and add an unwrap UVW. And this green is what it's showing is seams. So right now, our UVW map isn't looking too good. So let's open up our editor to kind of see what we have. I'm just going to bring this over here. And we can see we have some really weird things. Now, I got this model off of the internet, so some things are already unwrapped, but I'm going to go ahead and just reset everything. So let's see, let's reset our UVs. Yep, let's reset them. Oh, well, that was default, so let's go to mapping, flatten mapping, and we'll just go say, yeah, that's fine. And then I'm going to move everything off of my work area. Now that I've done that, what I like to do is start grouping things. So I'm going to group things that I want to be together. I want this tank to be together. I want the frame to be together. This axle piece to be together, and the tire to be together. So what I'm going to do is start selecting those objects. Just those objects. So let's grow our selection. Let's grow our selection. Any stragglers we have. Now I'm doing, if something's already selected, to select more of it, I'm just holding down the control key, and I'm using a marquee where I can just click while still holding it to select more. Okay, and then I'm going to move all of that away from everything else. Okay, now let's do the same thing with this wheel. Turn back face off. Grow my selection. These are all flipped. So what I need to do is come back down to editable poly, and what that means is, without getting too complicated, my normals are facing inside instead of facing outside. We saw that color. So a darker red means that we're looking at the inside of the object, and that's weird, but other videos will go into a little bit more depth, and we'll flip that outside. And that bright red, okay, so that's showing us what we want to see, and that's all. See the difference there? Okay. So we'll turn that off and go back into this unwrap UVW and open our editor. Then hopefully this time I'll be able to select all of my tire. I grow my selection, and we're not, so we'll just select some of it and grow it until we have everything we want. Okay, so we'll just move this over here. And I know that I have pieces of this axle, but that's okay because I'm going to grow that so I can get all of the axle. And I can move all of that away. And if it's stretched, that's okay because we're going to be doing some stuff to it anyway. Okay, so let's maybe start with this tire first. And I know that it might look a little complicated because all of these pieces that are being shown and some that aren't, but we're just going to do like we did before. Things that we want to be together, we're going to select them. Okay, and I can come in and even click here. And you kind of have to ask yourself, what pieces do I want to be together? What pieces make up what I'm selecting? So I'm going to select all the pieces of this part of the tire. And I'm going to do a flatten mapping like we did in another video. So projection, planar map. And if we go back here, we can see by default we're in a Z axis, and that's not where we want to be. So we're going to change this to Y. Does that work for us? Yep. Okay. Now something you can do here, now that I have this done, is we can try to do a quick planar map. And that didn't work for us. It distorted it. So I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to do that planar map again on the Y axis. I'm going to turn that off and leave it alone. So now that I have that unwrapped how I want it, I'm going to bring it off here, leave it alone. Let's go to the next thing. Okay, so let's talk about this rim right here. Let's grow our selection, see what we get. Grow, 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 grow. So all I'm doing is clicking and selecting what I want to unwrap next. And again, I'm going to do the projection map. We have our projection there. I'm going to turn that off and move it. Since I have it, I'm going to move it. Now what we can do, if we don't care if some of these pieces have the same texture, for example, this bit here, if we don't really care if it shares the same texture as the front of the wheel here, then we can do these together. We can unwrap these together. So I'm just moving, rotating, scaling so I can get a good view of what it is that I want to select. And then again, I'm going to do that planar map on the Y. And when I get done with it, move it out of the way. So I'm going to try to do this for all the things that I want to unwrap. So let's get the tread to be a different piece by itself. Maybe I want all of that. Let's see, do I? Nope, I just want that middle part. So again, I'm making decisions on how I'm going to unwrap. I'm going to have this face here different than this here because I want this to be the tread of my tire. So here we're going to go into another projection that we talked about briefly but didn't use, and that's the cylindrical map. So here we can see once I clicked on cylindrical map, now when in the other video where we kind of did the cylinder, we can kind of see the same thing here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off and bring this down because what I want to do is put that checkerboard texture on this whole model so that we can see what's distorted and what's not. And the reason why we do that is we can see that this wheel here is really, 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 really distorted. So I'm going to go back to my Unwrap UVW, select this, and then I'm going to scale. If I scale uniformly, that's not going to work though, because those are still really long. So instead, I'm going to try to scale horizontally. And if I do that, and I bring it out far enough, we can see that those squares or those rectangles become more square-like. So I'm just going to keep doing that until they're as square as I want them to be. Okay, now we see we scaled out quite a bit. So now I can scale uniformly because remember, everything has to fit inside that box. I'm just going to scale it until it does. And this is one of those things, and we might even try this with a texture when we talked about in another video, where if we go outside of the box, it will repeat to what's on the opposite side. So since this is a tread, and we can make this a tileable texture, then we might just see if we can show what it looks like if we go outside this bounding box here. Okay, but for right now, let's try to unwrap a little bit more of this. So let's say that I've got the wheels. Now let's go ahead and select these as well. I'm going to include these with my tread. It's going to take me a little bit of extra time. I could have already done this, but I changed my mind, and that's perfectly fine. You can do that too. I'm going to select these objects. And then I'm going to use my cylindrical map again. Turn that off, and then use my horizontal scale again until those rectangles are perfect to scale to a square that we can get them. That's what we want. Okay, so we're pretty good. And again, we'll do a uniform scale. Scale that down so it fits on the inside pretty good. And for what we're doing right now, we're going to say that's good. Okay, so I've got everything for my wheel done. Okay, now that I got that, I'm going to bring this over, and I'm going to bring all of my wheel over. And then what I want to do is, remember, I have to fit everything in this square. And the pieces that are bigger in this square are the ones that are going to get more detail. Because the bigger you are in the square, the more room you have to draw and add effects and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to save a little bit of space here by taking the inside of this wheel and scaling it until I can fit it inside my regular wheel. This is going to save me a little bit of room. I'm not wasting a whole lot of room inside the tire. Okay. And then this whole thing I'm going to scale down because the tire is important, but to me, in this model, it's not the most important thing. I'm going to scale it down a little bit so it takes up less room. And then what I'm going to do is try to find out where this edge connects. Okay, we can see it connects right here. So I'm just going to take that and move that over. Is that the right one? Nope. Move that over one and down. And if I need to scale or move or rotate, I can do all that kind of stuff, but we're pretty good right there. It's not perfect, but we're pretty close. So we're going to say good. Okay, now if I were to take this whole thing and move it, I'm still within my box. I haven't used up my whole box for one tire. Okay, so now let's go on to another piece, and I want to try to unwrap this tank here, which is all these pieces. Okay, so maybe let's see what would happen if we did a cylindrical projection map. Let's see. And I want to make sure that I'm on the correct axis. So I'm going to need to go to, I believe, an x-axis. There we go. Now, if this bounding box isn't where I need it to be, I can always move that bounding box. I can rotate the bounding box. And we can see what happens when I do all of those things, how it's changing my UVs here. I can also scale. Okay, so I'm going to try to get this pretty close. And I'm not too worried about these end pieces. So I'm going to say I'm pretty close right there. Okay. Then, so I'm going to accept it and just turn that off. And then remember, I'm going to go ahead and scale it horizontally like we did with the tire until those are pretty square. Now we can see that I've already squished a little bit too much, so I'm going to go back the other way. There we go. That looks pretty good. And that's pretty surprising that we don't have to do that much work on this tank. We're pretty good right there. There are some distortions, but it's okay for what we're going to do. So I'm going to move that off, and now let's talk about those end pieces. So for that, what I'm going to do is select that end piece and go to a planar map, and I'm already there. Oh my goodness, that looks pretty. Okay, so I'm going to turn that back off and move it, and then I'll do the same thing with the other face. There we go, nice and pretty. Turn that back off. Get our face here. And then we're not going to be able to connect all of these faces unless we move each and every one of these vertices to match, and that's just not going to work for us. The main thing that we want to do is have the bulk of this tank nice and even, and we see with those squares. And then what we're going to try to do is just kind of see where we can fit the closest on the other one. So we can see this part here connects there. So are we even in the right orientation? Let's check our vertices. Okay, so if we rotate this 180 degrees, let's see what happens. I want to rotate 180 degrees. Okay, let's see if they match up. So they do that way. So I'm going to select this. Well, first let's move this one out of the way. Select this object and move it so I'm not getting in the way of this other thing. Move this up here. And let's see, where are we again? Here and here. Okay. So I'm going to select this whole thing, scale it down, make sure I'm in universal, and move this object. Okay, we're going to call that good. And we can connect it if we want to. We went over that in another video, so if you want to do that, that's perfectly fine. But I'm going to try to work a little bit quicker so we can get through some more stuff. Now here we can see that I'm already facing the direction that I need to, but we can see that these vertices are not going to line up. They're on the opposite end. And if I turn this 90 degrees, that's not going to work or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mirror it vertically. That's going to turn it 180 degrees, but on a vertical axis. And you might not even notice a difference. So let's click this and see if we even notice a difference here. Didn't notice a difference at all. But if we now select that corner vertex, we can see that now we're lined up. So it mirrored it vertically. So I'm going to scale that in, move that, and let's make this window a little bit bigger so we have more room to work with. Okay, I like that a little bit better. And typically I have this on a completely different window, so I can have a whole monitor's worth of space. But my recording software only records one screen, so that's where we are. Okay, let's scale that out. We're just going to try to get it close. That looks pretty good right there. So now we have a tire that's done, a whole wheel, and our entire container. Now, what you'll notice, let me turn this off right here. What you'll notice is that on this model, I only have one wheel because there's something else that I wanted to show you. And I'm going to go ahead and save my UVW. So I'm going to right click and convert to an editable poly. That saves my UVWs. And I'm going to select this tire here. Now, an awesome thing, if I copy an object that's already unwrapped, it copies that unwrap as well. So I'm actually going to detach this, and I'm going to name it wheel. Always try to name everything in your scene. And now it's its own entity. And what I'm going to try to do is mirror it. Okay, so this is a tool that we've gone over in other videos, but let's go over it and how we can use it in unwrapping. So I'm going to mirror this object, and I'm going to, let's try on the y-axis. There we go, on the y-axis, and we can see that it moves it over the other side. But we want to keep that one over here, so I'm going to make it a copy. Now I can also make it an instance or a reference, so if I change that, it will change the other one. So if I move a vert, the other one it will move on the other one. But for what we want to do, we just want to copy. Okay, so now we have two wheels. And I'm going to go ahead and attach, so I've got the water tank, and I'm going to come in my edit poly and attach these two wheels so that they'll also be a part of it. And we can see that those UVs didn't change. Now if I add my unwrap UVW back to my editable poly and open up my UV editor again, let me bring that back over here. What we'll see is we still have all the UVs that we had in the same place because it did save it. But now we have, if I select this tire, we have two tires. And the reason why it's doing that, this wheel, is because they're overlapping each other. So if I were to select this and then come and deselect this tire and move this, we see, ooh, I had my back face cold. So if I deselect this tire and then move it, we see we have a perfect copy behind it because they were overlaid on top of each other. And things that are going to be the same, like tires, that's okay because we can save UV space without having to unwrap a whole other tire and have it be beside it or take up any more area here. Instead, since we can use the same texture, well, let's go ahead and use the same UVs in the same space as well and just save some space. Okay, now I know that we talked that we were going to unwrap everything, but we've done the three big things, and the same tools that we used to unwrap our tank and our tires, we can also use for our frame. So if you want to find this and it's on Turbo Squid, then you can do that and download it and unwrap it. The next thing that I want to show real quick though is how we want to try to fit everything inside of this box, because remember, this is where this is the space we have for our texture. So we did this a little bit already. We're just going to kind of do it really quick. We want everything to be in those bounding boxes, even unless we want them specifically to repeat. So I'm just going to move this a little bit inside that bounding box. Then I'll bring this tire and maybe I'll mirror this horizontally and vertically so I have it on the other side. So I want to try to fit it all together as well as I can, kind of like a puzzle piece. So I'll scale this down a little bit because if I have objects that overlap, they'll both share that texture. And I don't want the tire texture to be on the tank, and I don't want the tank texture to be on the tire. So just scale that down so they have their own space and move it however we want. Okay, and then we can use all of these other pieces, and when we unwrap them, we can use them to fill in parts that we want, and so on and so forth. So over the past couple of videos, what we've talked about is how we can unwrap objects, either using a UVW map or an unwrap UVW. And specifically within a UVW, how we can unwrap things further and connect them so that our texture can flow between one polygon and another. And we've taken a look at a bunch of tools and what we can do. And so what I would suggest is download a model. And if you're starting out, I would try to do a pretty low poly model. The higher poly you get, the more work you're going to do unwrapping it. And just play around with it and unwrap it. And there's a couple of tools we didn't go over, like the pelt map, which is relatively new. It hasn't been in Mac the whole time, but this is really good for things like faces and skin. And I would invite you to, we might do another video on that one. So I invite you to play around with that and see if you can figure it out before the next video's out. Until then, download something, have fun with it, unwrap it, learn the tools, practice, get better at it, and of course, have fun.